After witnessing a gangland execution, school teacher Ray Brooks is tracked down by gangsters. Ray is then forced to watch his wife and two grown-up children murdered. Left for dead and with no faith in the British judicial system, Ray decides to take matters into his own hands. The movie starts with a man lying in a hospital bed. He slowly wakes up, his vision blurry. A doctor approaches and calls him Mr. Ray Brooks, asking how he's feeling. As Ray begins to regain his senses, the first thing he does is ask about his family. However, the doctor avoids answering the question. Instead, the doctor explains that Ray had been in a medically induced coma for the last 3 months after suffering a severe chest injury. He reassures Ray that his recovery has gone smoothly and there were no complications. Ray, still concerned, asks about his family once more, but the doctor tells him that the police will be coming to speak with him soon, without offering any further information. The scene shifts to an interrogation room where Ray is being questioned by a police officer named Shelby. Ray begins to describe what happened. He explains that there are 3 men, and everything starts the night he and his wife, Kim, are driving home. They get lost, so Ray pulls over to check the map in the trunk. As soon as he steps out of the car, he sees 3 men brutally beating a young man nearby. While watching in shock, a 4th man, who seems to be the leader, arrives. His name is Frank Noonan. Without hesitation, Frank takes a gun from one of his men and, without mercy, executes the young man right in front of them. Horrified, Ray freezes for a moment, but then the men spot him. Panicked, he rushes back to the car and speeds off before they can catch him. Inside the car, Kim notices Ray is visibly shaken and asks him what happened. In a panic, Ray tells her he just witnessed an execution. Kim, terrified, urges him to call the police immediately. But Ray, still in shock, insists they can't. He explains that these men are dangerous gangsters, and getting involved could put both of their lives in serious danger. The scene shifts back to the investigation, where Officer Shelby is asking Ray to identify the men who came to his house by looking through a series of photos. Ray hesitates for a moment, then asks Shelby if this means he will have to testify in court. When Shelby confirms, Ray immediately backs off. He shakes his head and tells the officer that if he testifies against these gangsters, he'll be dead long before the trial even begins. Ray is clearly frightened and refuses to take the risk. Shelby, understanding the fear, offers him police protection and slides his business card across the table, telling Ray to contact him if he changes his mind. With a last glance, Shelby gets up and leaves the room, leaving Ray deep in thought. After some time, Ray returns to his house. As he approaches the front door, he notices a pile of mail scattered on the ground. He picks up one of the letters and starts to read it. His expression changes, sadness washing over him, and tears begin to well up in his eyes. Overcome with emotion, Ray starts crying softly. As he stands there, he suddenly has a flashback of his family. In the memory, Ray is at home with his wife, Kim, and their 2 kids, Victoria and Max. It's a typical morning, and they're all gathered around the breakfast table, laughing and talking as they get ready for the day. Max, with a playful grin, tells everyone that Victoria has a boyfriend, and he's older than her. Ray, hearing this, smiles and turns to Victoria, giving her a gentle but protective reminder to be careful with boys. The moment is warm and full of love, but as the flashback fades, Ray is brought back to the present, alone and consumed by sorrow. The scene shifts back to the empty house, where Ray sits slumped on the staircase, lost in thought. Slowly, he pulls himself up and heads to the kitchen. Desperate to escape the weight of his painful memories, he pours himself a drink. As he sips, the alcohol dulls his senses, but his mind pulls him back into another flashback. In this memory, Ray is getting ready to leave for work. Kim, standing by the door, looks concerned and asks him what he plans to do about the execution he witnessed. Ray pauses for a moment, visibly torn, and tells her that he knows he should report it, but he's hesitant. He doesn't want to get involved with the dangerous gangster world and put their lives at risk. Kim watches him closely, understanding the fear in his voice. She steps closer and reassures him, saying that whatever decision he makes, she will stand by his side. The scene shifts back to Ray, sitting in a dimly lit, empty room. His face is tense with focus as he makes a plan. Spread out in front of him are photos of the gangsters, and his eyes lock onto one picture in particular, a man named Billy. Ray picks up a marker and circles Billy's face, drawing a line through it with grim determination. A flashback begins, taking us to the moment when Billy first appears at Ray's home. He knocks on the door, and Kim opens it to find a stranger standing there. Billy, with a casual smile, tells her he's looking for his dog and asks if she could check her backyard. Kim, not sensing any immediate danger, agrees and steps out to take a look. Meanwhile, Billy takes the opportunity to subtly scan the inside of the house, his eyes roaming over the layout, picking up details that seem to interest him. A few moments later, Kim returns, telling Billy there's no sign of any dog in their yard. She suggests he check with the neighbors instead. Billy thanks her with a polite nod but takes a lingering look at the house before he leaves. In the present, Ray sits in the shadows, stalking Billy's profile on his computer, his eyes filled with rage and cold determination. A flashback follows, taking us to the horrifying night when Billy enters Ray's home. Along with his associate, Connor, Billy creeps into Max's room, then drags Kim, Victoria, and Max downstairs, their terrified screams filling the air. Ray, already tied to a chair, struggles helplessly as his family is gathered in front of him. Their ruthless leader, Kane, calmly orders Billy to shoot Kim. Without hesitation, Billy pulls the trigger, and Kim collapses to the ground as Ray watches in horror, unable to protect her. Back in the present, Ray is done waiting. His mind is made up, and it's time to act. He grabs a knife from his home and heads straight to Billy's place. Meanwhile, inside Billy's rundown apartment, the gangster is busy cooking up drugs and injecting himself, already slipping into a heavy drug-induced haze. Ray quietly slips into the apartment and confronts Billy, who is barely aware of what's happening. Ray demands the names of the others who came to his house that night, but Billy, dazed and defiant, refuses to comply. Without warning, Ray plunges the knife into Billy's leg, making him scream in agony. He gives Billy a sinister command, to cook more drugs and inject himself again. But Billy, desperate, tries to turn the needle toward Ray in a last-ditch effort to attack. Ray reacts swiftly, and in one clean, brutal strike, he plunges the knife into Billy, killing him instantly. Ray, now covered in blood, returns home and washes the blood from his body. In another flashback, we see Connor following Victoria to a club. Victoria, sensing something off, tells Connor that she's waiting for someone and decides to leave the club. Connor, undeterred, waits for her to go and then sneaks into her room. Once inside, he finds her underwear and begins to sniff them, a disturbing indication of his sinister intentions. The scene shifts to Ray's home, where Officer Shelby arrives for a visit. Shelby shows Ray a picture of Billy and asks if he recognizes him. Ray, trying to keep his composure, denies knowing him. Shelby then delivers shocking news: Billy was found murdered that morning. He reveals that Billy was a member of Frank Noonan's gang and suggests that this gang might be linked to the murder of Ray's family. Shelby's implication is clear: the gang's dangerous ties could mean that Ray is still in grave danger. Ray responds with frustration and defiance. He tells Shelby that he refuses to live his life in constant fear just because he crossed paths with the wrong people. He expresses his skepticism about the British justice system, indicating that he doesn't believe it will offer him any real protection or justice. In another flashback, Victoria, desperate and frightened, asks the gangsters for permission to use the toilet. Connor, still holding her captive, reluctantly agrees and escorts her. Once they are in a more private area, Connor cuts her loose but warns her not to try anything clever. He then demands to see her room, and as they head there, his intentions become clear. He plans to get intimate with her, but before he can act, Kane bursts in and interrupts. Kane then drags both Victoria and Connor back downstairs, putting an end to Connor's plans. The scene shifts to the present, where Connor is in a state of panic. He anxiously makes phone calls, trying to reach someone, and grabs his car keys, preparing to leave. Just as he gets inside his car, someone suddenly points a gun at him. Connor's eyes widen in shock as he realizes it's Ray, who he thought was dead. Overcome with fear, Connor tries to explain that he was only following orders, but Ray coldly tells him that they are all guilty. In a flashback, Kane tells Connor to shoot Victoria, and Connor does it without hesitation. Realizing that Ray must have killed Billy and is now after him, Connor panics. He tries to distract Ray and then attacks him. During their fight, Connor slashes Ray with a knife, but Ray manages to grab Connor's gun and shoots him. After the fight, Ray goes back home and puts a bandage on his wound. The next morning, Officer Shelby comes back to Ray's house. He tells Ray that Connor was found murdered and that Connor was also part of Frank Noonan's gang. Shelby says that all these murders seem to be connected, and they are trying to figure out how. He asks if he can search Ray's house for clues, but Ray refuses, saying Shelby needs a search warrant. Ray tells him to leave, and Shelby, frustrated but understanding, leaves the house. In the flashback, Kane orders Ray to hand over all their phones, laptops, and computers so he can remove any evidence against them. Ray pleads with Kane to leave his family alone, but Kane coldly replies that it's just business to him. In the present, Kane receives a letter and finds a list of the names of his dead men, a grim reminder of the chaos that has unfolded. Back in the flashback, while Kane is terrorizing the family, Max sees a chance to escape. He runs and hides inside a closet. Despite his efforts to stay hidden, Kane eventually finds him and pulls him out. Max is brought back downstairs, where Kane kills him right in front of Ray and Kim. They can only watch in horror as their son is murdered. In the present, Kane meets with Frank, who immediately asks about the situation. Kane reports that Ray is still alive and is making his way closer to them. Frank, clearly frustrated, orders Kane to find Ray and eliminate him once and for all to ensure he no longer poses a threat. Kane follows Ray in his car, plotting his next move, while Shelby is also tracking the situation, keeping a close eye on both of them. In a flashback, Ray confronts Kane, asking him why he is doing this. Kane's chilling response is simply that he's doing it because he can. Ray, filled with determination and anger, vows to hunt Kane down no matter where he goes. But before he can take any action, Kane shoots him. In the present, Kane enters a building, with Ray close behind, clutching a gun. As they confront each other, a gunfight erupts, with Kane taking cover behind some boxes. Meanwhile, Officer Shelby arrives at the scene and grabs a gun from his trunk. The fight between Ray and Kane gets more intense as they face off in the building. Gunshots ring out as Ray chases Kane, who hides behind some boxes. They eventually stand right in front of each other, guns aimed and ready. Just as they're about to shoot, Officer Shelby rushes in. He shouts at them to put down their guns. Ray and Kane, both determined, refuse to back down. In a critical moment, Shelby steps in and shoots Kane. Kane is stunned, his eyes wide with shock as he looks at Shelby. Shelby, firm and resolute, tells Kane that he has now gotten his justice. With that, Kane falls, and Shelby's words mark the end of a long, dangerous game of revenge. After the intense showdown, Officer Shelby advises Ray to leave town immediately before the police arrive in the morning to question him. He warns Ray that they will come for him soon, and he should avoid being caught up in the investigations. This time, Ray heeds the warning and drives away from the scene. Some time later, Ray finds himself in a dimly lit pub, seeking solace. As he sits at the bar, Frank enters the establishment, looking around with a casual air. He tells Ray that they are closed and expresses that he doesn't recognize him. Ray, unfazed, stands up and approaches Frank with a cold, determined expression. He reveals his gun and his identity, making it clear who he is. In a dramatic and final act of vengeance, Ray shoots Frank, fulfilling his quest for revenge for his family's murder. Frank, taken by surprise, has no chance to react. Ray then leaves the pub, getting back into his car and driving out of town. The movie ends with Ray disappearing into the night, leaving behind a trail of retribution. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to our channel for more amazing recaps. Remember to subscribe and turn on notifications, so you can watch more movies like this. Thanks for watching.